The crystal hung in black space like a slow thought, a jewel the size of a city, refracting distant stars. Inside its interior, the Galactic Council chamber curved like a bowl-shaped horizon. 47 species filled the stepped seats, each sound and body foreign enough to be a different physics. Translator arrays hummed and braided languages into a single flow so that everyone could hear everyone else. You could call it civilized, a kind of bureaucratic transcendence, if it weren't also the tribunal that had just decided the fate of humanity. General Jake Morrison felt small in that geometry. His dark blue uniform was plain among robes that glowed, carapaces that gleamed like wet stone, and suits filled with living storms. Captain Lisa Rodriguez and Dr. Nathan Clark stood behind him like human punctuation. They looked ordinary. That ordinariness would be their armor. Up in the higher tiers the Vorax sat like an accusation, clicking shells, mandibles that moved in thoughtless rhythm. War Queen Klar watched with compound eyes that betrayed nothing. Nearby, Zenari forms drifted in containment, bodies of pure energy trapped in transparent suits, speaking in notes as if their words were music. The ancient Kthar reclined like mountains grafted with circuitry, slow-souled and slow-speaking. Aquarian delegates kept their skin wet with steady sprays and spoke like rivers rolling over polished stones. And in the center, Speaker Zixitha of the Nexus Collective glowed like a thinking crystal, light patterns tracing concepts in color. This emergency session of the Galactic Council will now begin, the crystal announced, and the chamber quieted to the hum of life systems. The words were short, but their meaning was precise. The Council had come to indict humanity. Morrison had expected the day. Reports had already come in, human colonies encountering Council species without warning, demands to abandon worlds, settlements evacuated under threat. He had known that to other species, humanity's expansion looked like invasion. To humans it had been hunger, curiosity, survival. Between those two truths lay 1,000 misunderstandings, and an older legal code the Council called the Non-Inference Protocols, 10,000 years of rules designed to keep species from reshaping other worlds. Dr. Nathan Clark, humanity's diplomat, was meant to parse those rules. Morrison was meant to be the reminder that humans could fight if needed. The speaker listed charges in a voice that seemed to come from every angle at once: aggressive expansion beyond approved boundaries, violations of non-inference protocols, destruction of protected worlds during unauthorized colonization. The Aquarian raised a fin and presented the first evidence, Tidy 3, an ocean world now marked in holographic blues and greens. They said Tidy had been sacred for 3 million years, that every 7 centuries their young spawned in those waters and that human mining had poisoned the deep. The hologram doved to show human underwater platforms cutting veins of ore from the seabed. The Aquarian voice bubbled with grief: the spawning would fail, a generation would be lost. Morrison's jaw tightened. Human surveys had found no signs of the supposed spawn. Sensors had detected what looked like barren waters. Yet the Aquarian insisted, human sensors were crude, their sampling shallow. The accusation hung like a stone on the scale. Next, the Hive Mind Collective, a speaker whose voice was many voices, brought up the Vega buffer zones. Buffer zones, they said, now dotted with human installations and weapons. The hologram lit 3 planets where red markers clustered. These installations, they insisted, aimed at hive mind colonies and readied for invasion. Those are point defense systems, Captain Rodriguez whispered to Morrison. Standard, asteroid mitigation, debris shields. Every human colony builds them. It mattered little. The Kthar then spoke, their words like grinding stone. Humans had built cities on ancient Kava resting places, sacred sites older than most species. Simple piles of stone to human eyes, sacred monuments to the Kthar, moved or built upon by settlers who had assumed ignorance rather than sacrilege. The pattern became clear in the way the evidence was arranged. Ordinary human acts, mining for infrastructure, putting up point defenses, settling barren rocks, were framed with ancestral claims and long cultural histories the Council assumed best qualified to judge. Each accusation reframed survival as aggression. War Queen Klar's mandibles clicked. These mammals breed too quickly and spread too fast, she said. They will consume resources needed by established peoples. You can hear how the phrase alien empire echoes through moments like this, an idea older civilizations used to explain foreign growth. But these weren't an empire in the old sense. The Galactic Council was a collective authority, an interspecies governance whose judgment carried the weight of law. And those laws, these 47 species insisted, had been broken. When the ruling came, it was blunt: humanity must withdraw from all disputed territories within one solar rotation. 17 worlds, abandoned. Monitoring stations to be imposed. If humanity disobeyed, the Council would enforce the ruling by force. Dr. Clark tried bargaining. These colonies had known settlers, millions who called them home. Reason, he said. The crystal flashed red and said the decision was final. Morrison felt something colder than policy, a moral calculus that made no room for people. He had expected a legal challenge. He had not expected moral indifference. We will need time, said Dr. Clark. You have one solar rotation, War Queen Clar hissed. Outside that dome, the human name for it, Galactic Council, occupied old myths and modern treaties alike. Inside, the word had teeth. When the session ended, the council representatives filed out in their stately, alien manner. The chamber felt huge and suddenly very empty of mercy. Morrison and his small human retinue remained in the center, the last remnants of a species the council had just tried to make disappear on paper. We go home and prepare for war, Morrison said quietly, not in a callous way but like a surgeon stating necessary facts. Behind the words was something else, a promise that the species called humanity would answer whatever the council proposed. That answer, the shape of it, its moral cost, and its consequences, was still unwritten. If you're following this story, drop a comment. Would you obey an interstellar court that stripped your home? Like if you want part 2, and don't forget to subscribe, there's more ahead. The theme words you'll hear again: alien empire, Galactic Council, humanity, and asymmetric warfare. Back aboard the UN ship Liberty, the command deck felt small but honest: monitors, charts, officers who had eaten more salt than any diplomat should. Holographic starfield spun as the ship flexed through a corridor of political space. Here, physics still obeyed human schedules and human urgency. Morrison moved through the ship like a returning tide. Captain Rodriguez and Dr. Clark kept pace. Arya, assemble senior staff in briefing room 1, he told the ship's artificial intelligence. Arya answered in a voice that was efficient and mercifully free of rhetoric. At the long table, people who had seen one another through long wars gathered: Major Ryan Mitchell from Special Ops, Lieutenant Bobby Carter, Commander Lisa Hayes from Intelligence. They looked at Morrison with the tired concentration of people deciding how to gamble the future. Area, show tactical assessment of Council capabilities, Morrison ordered. Blue projections filled the air, ship designs older than most species' national myths, weapons that bent energy in ways human engineers had only approximated, fleet sizes that made the human force look numerically negligible, 10,400 Council warships versus human fleet strengths measured in the hundreds. Quantitative disadvantage was one thing. The worst thing was the unfamiliarity. Their last major conflict was 8,000 years ago, Area reported. Most vessels have no combat history, but their technology is far more advanced. And yet there were qualitative differences, and weaknesses. Commander Hayes reported 3 colonies lost 3 months earlier: New Eden, Haven's Rest, Port Liberty. Communication dropped, rescue teams found cities intact but empty. 2 million humans, gone. The truth that scanned out of the wreckage was more terrible than evacuation reports. Forensic scans showed Vorak breeding ships harvesting New Eden's population into biomass. Zenari energy collectors had drained neural patterns from Haven's Rest. Port Liberty's human remains had been arranged by Kathar ritual, bodies compressed into geometric formations. Morrison felt the weight of those images like a hand on the throat of history. This was not displacement, it was genocide. The term hit the room in the way only slow, precise diction can, a legal term married to irreparable human cost. Dr. Clark's diplomatic channels ran like dripping water. He had filed grievances and evidence. The council's reply was a conceptual shrug: "Our surveys are better, your colonization lacked technical adequacy, you trespassed." The council's language folded human lives into legal precedent, ancestral rights, sacred breeding grounds, cultural continuity. Their vocabulary neutralized horror. The strategy conversation that followed was clinical and then personal. "Arya, probability of conventional human victory?" Morrison asked. The AI answered, 0.03%. To use standard doctrine against such disparity was to accept annihilation. Morrison and his staff stared at the projection of alien armadas assembling near Proxima, thousands of ships in loose, species-centric formations. Each species clustered with its own patterns, its own command protocols. They were strong together but not cohesive. In fact, they were astonishingly disunited. "That's the opening," Major Mitchell said. "The Council depends on rules, on coordination that assumes honorable engagements. They expect enemies who play along. What if we don't?" Unconventional warfare is what humans had always been at, asymmetric warfare in the sense that numbers and raw tech don't determine outcomes so much as creativity, will, and the ability to exploit logistics. Humans had fought with more primitive tools and won. Here, the concept applied to interstellar strategy: hit supply lines, disrupt command nodes, and exploit cultural blind spots. The Council species' long peace had softened tactical instincts, their doctrine was brittle. Dr. Elizabeth Stone, from Human Research Command, opened a different window. The alien systems were advanced but specialized. Vorak bioweapons ate living tissue and failed against synthetic matter. Zenari energy matrices were vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses and containment destabilization. Kthvar stone constructs resonated to sonic frequencies. Engineers had reverse-engineered captured tech for months and built prototype counters, EMP generators to dissipate Zenari fields, biological agents tuned to Vorak physiology, sonic disruptors to crack Kathar armor. None of these were magical, they were improvisations and adaptations born of human history. There is a darker practical calculus in preparing such tools: they're designed to exploit an opponent's sensory and cultural expectations. The Council expects a certain etiquette of conduct. Human forces plan to weaponize their assumption of honor. That is a core tenet of asymmetric warfare, not brute force, but unpredictable, culturally aware strikes that unravel cohesion. The human fleet's morale report was a strange and stirring thing. Farmers in Green Valley converting tractors into mobile missile platforms. Retired veterans training civilian volunteers at Kepler Station. Colony militias organizing. In every frontier town, people were choosing to stay and to fight because their homes were not abstract territory but memory, food, daughters, and fathers. That human willingness to escalate unpredictably was itself a weapon. Morrison's staff laid out the campaign like a surgeon draws blood. Target coordination nodes and supply depots rather than entire fleets. Plant stealth sensors in gaps between languages. Forge transponder codes using captured alien comms so that human ships could move inside Council sensor nets without being recognized. Time attacks to fracture the alliance, strike shipyards, fuel depots, and communication relays in ways that would leave the species having to choose between mutual defense and species-first survival. "It's total war," Governor Linda Hayes said softly, and the words were heavy with the knowledge that total war consumes more than ships. "We ask for justice, not annihilation," Dr. Stone replied, "but justice won't come through polite negotiation if they have already practiced genocide." Morrison's face held a stillness that was not peace but intention. He knew the line they were about to step over. Asymmetric warfare, the very phrase repeated in briefing slides, was a strategy that turns vulnerability to advantage. It asks the question, what are you willing to be when home is threatened? It also forces an answer about the moral cost of survival. "Prepare the fleets," Morrison ordered. "Forge the transponders. Train the teams for covert strikes. Coordinate with every colonial governor. Make sure no human world mistakes surrender for safety. The plan carried a thread that was as political as it was tactical, to show the Council that genocide creates a species that will respond without constraints. It was a gamble with ethics tied to the raw human instinct to protect. If civilized rules had prevented this disaster, those rules were now a ruin. The only certainty was that the next act would test whether a species called humanity ever intended to be prey. If you like this slow-burn approach, the blend of political theater and technical detail, tell me in the comments which tactical idea surprised you most, the EMP plan, the transponder forgeries, or the genetically targeted Vorak agents. Subscribe for part 3, the response, and hit the bell if you want the finale in your feed. When General Morrison walked back into the crystal chamber, he carried a different kind of weight. This time he wore his dress uniform not for ceremony but as a declaration. He brought with him the human fleet's honor guard and a stillness that felt like a blade. The Council expected a plea. They expected meekness. They did not expect the evidence he carried, not just accusation but counterproof, forensic scans, recovered data, unambiguous records of what had occurred on New Eden, Haven's Rest, and Port Liberty. Morrison did not bow. He stood. This is not about disputed territory, he said. This is about genocide. For a long moment the chamber buzzed with alien disbelief. The Vorak clicked and hissed, the Aquarian bubbled protests, the Cathar ground their stony voices. Morrison switched on the holographic projector. The 3 destroyed colonies hovered above the council floor like memorials. He named numbers, 700,000 on New Eden, 400,000 on Haven's Rest, 900,000 on Port Liberty, 2 million humans taken, processed, arranged, drained. The reactions were not what humans would call shame. They were pragmatic. The Vorak spoke of ancestral breeding grounds, the Zenari admitted they used neural patterns as food, the Cathar explained their rituals required organic components. The Council's language parsed bodies into resources. In that moment, the alien empire, the coalition of species that thought itself above such baser conflicts, revealed its moral architecture. To them, human lives could be justified as sacrifice under certain cultural logics. To humanity, this was unforgivable. Morrison let the silence stretch. He then did what the Council never expected, he did not ask for mercy. He announced redress and consequence. He activated a secure channel and spoke to the assembled human fleet watching from hidden positions throughout Council space. The alarms began simultaneously across the chamber. Messages poured in from every corner of the galaxy, human fleets detected in system, ships approaching critical infrastructure, request immediate assistance. The Council's sensors that had been trained to look for standard transponder signatures missed what came next. Human ships used forged codes, captured alien transponders, stealth approaches. They did not play by the rules. What followed was not an elegant battle of honor. It was asymmetric warfare writ large, human ingenuity leveraging Council rigidity. Stealth frigates led kamikaze runs at Vorak carriers, not in the theater of old ideas about honor but with biological payloads calibrated to their physiology. EMP arrays overloaded Zenari containment, collapsing living storms into scattering flashes. Sonic disruptors cracked Cathar stone fortresses. Human commandos breached shipyards and detonated charges in places the Council had never thought to defend, production facilities, supply nodes, communication matrices. The Council's armada, vast but oddly brittle, began to fray. Their forces were cohesive only in faith, each species operated in its own protocols and languages, translation latencies making coordinated response slow. Humans had exploited this. They had gone after what held the alliance together rather than the alliance itself, logistics, production, command hubs. On board Liberty, Morrison watched reports flow in with the cool concentration of someone watching a long, necessary ritual unfold. Vorak ships writhed as biological payloads spread through living components. Zenari forms blinked out like failing stars when their matrices overloaded. Cathar fortresses fractured and fell into space dust. And as each species found its sacred artifacts and supply chains under attack, distrust spread through the council, species accused one another, ancient alliances splintered into survivalist isolation. The human campaign was not indiscriminate cruelty. It was targeted, precise, and aimed at structures that enabled genocide. But make no mistake, people died on both sides. War is always an anatomy of loss. The moral calculus Morrison and Earth's leaders chose was grim: accept immediate moral compromise to end an immediate moral atrocity. They had decided that inaction after genocide would only invite more atrocities. When the Council's military cohesion collapsed, its political facade began to crack. Representatives who had spoken about ancestral rights were suddenly pleading for emergency relief from their own home worlds. The Aquarian withdrew forces to defend its oceanic sanctuaries. The Qatar communication networks went cold as their infrastructure failed. The council chamber filled with the cacophony of species who had already been forced to turn their eyes inward. Morrison walked the chamber floor one last time before the human forces completed their objectives. He looked up at Speaker Zixitha, at War Queen Klar, at the ancient stony eyes of the Kthvar. "You created this," he said simply. "You taught us by your apathy that our people could be harvested. Remember this day." Now the council sat in stunned silence. They had not anticipated that the species they wrote off as mammals would coordinate such a campaign. They had not expected humans to exploit doctrinal expectations and cultural blind spots. And they had not expected the human insistence on justice rather than submission. The terms Morrison demanded were unambiguous: justice for the 2 million, full reparations and restoration where possible, guarantees that no human world would again be threatened by council enforcements, and a judicial review of the council's procedures for adjudicating interspecies claims, to prevent culture from becoming a license to kill. It was, at once, practical and symbolic. Justice, for humanity, would mean both compensation and structural change. The council, weakened and humiliated, agreed to negotiations they had never intended to hold in good faith. Their military power was broken, not destroyed. The galaxy had been changed. An alien empire, in human vernacular, had not been toppled, but its arrogance had been punctured. The balance would tilt now, not toward conquest, but toward a brittle, negotiated peace in which humans had shown that civilization's veneer could be shattered by a species willing to respond to genocide with decisive, asymmetrical force. When Morrison walked out of the chamber with his team, he did not celebrate. He had come with a slow, incisive lesson: civilized restraint can shelter atrocity, rule-bound empires can breed brutality in their blind spots. The question left to the future was bitter and simple: what price justice imposes on a species willing to pay it. The story's last shot is not fireworks but a quiet room where leaders write new treaties. Yet beyond those drafting tables, in the trenches and farms and habs of human colonies, the cost of rescue is counted in bones and grief. The victory was tactical, the wound long. If this tale, the collapse of an alien empire's moral certainty before human asymmetric warfare and the demand for justice after genocide, intrigued you, leave a comment. Tell me, do you think Morrison's approach was moral? Would you trade restraint for survival? Like, subscribe, and share this HFY-styled sci-fi story about humanity, transcendent intelligence, galactic council law, and how asymmetric warfare rewrote an interstellar order. Parting question: what would you do if an interstellar court told you your home was forfeit?